Hello, and welcome to our session on authoring anything with the Universal Editor. I'm Sharanya Vinod, and I'm one of the lead developers on the Universal Editor team here at Adobe.
And hello, my name is Artur, and I'm also working in the same work stream as Sharanya.
In this session, we'll have a quick introduction on the Universal Editor, followed by a high-level architecture. Then we'll have a short demo with some technical insights, a peek at what's coming up next, some developer kit resources that are already available online so you can get started, and finally wrap up with a Q&A session. So what exactly is the Universal Editor? It's an advanced in-context visual editor that is suitable for both headless and headful use cases. So why is in-context so important here? Let's take a look at these two pictures. If you take a look at just the content, it's perfectly valid, right? So T cell for successful living, no smoking, so safety first. Perfect, right? However, the experience still fails because of how the content is being inserted into the layout or design provided. So this is something that helps illustrate how critical it is for the content author to see the final layout of where the content is going to be added. In context editing helps bridge this gap between the content author and the final experience to be delivered and helps them create meaningful content. From a different perspective, it's also helpful for the author to add content in that they don't have to hunt down the source where the content resides, but rather simply just open the web page inside an editor, edit directly the changes that need to be made, and be assured that the changes are going to be saved at the appropriate destination without hindering the experience that is being delivered to their customers. This is also the perfect way to ensure the layouting options are applied appropriately. Say, for example, you want to add some content, just remove some things, make a huge title, just move some blocks around. And you can do all of these things and have a real live preview of what you are doing before you are delivering it to your customers. The next big question is, why is it a universal editor? This is because we are aiming to solve a multitude of use cases, regardless of implementation, content, or aspect. Say your app has any implementation, it could be client or server side rendered, it could be built using any framework, it could be React, Angular, Vue, anything at all. It could be hosted anywhere, and the editor absolutely doesn't care about it. The only thing that the editor cares about is the final DOM representation, and that's it. And this could mean that your app could be completely flexible. Say you want to upgrade your version, you want to move content from one framework to another, and you can do all of these things and rest assured that your editing capabilities are not going to be impacted at all. The next thing is that we are going to support any and all content. So while still supporting AEM page structures and content fragments, we are also working on supporting documents and spreadsheets and so on. We are also working on supporting any aspect. So this could mean you could provide advanced customizations on your website and do some personalizations and so on. This is also the key differentiator with the existing page editor and the SPA editor, in that both of these require the content to either be hosted on AEM, it has to follow a specified content structure, or the content has to be built using a specific framework. So now that we have an idea of what exactly is the universal editor, let's take a look at what's happening under the hood. So this is a very high level architecture of the universal editor. Consider you have a website that is built using your preferred mode of implementation, say any framework, SSR, or so on, as already discussed. And you are fetching content from your preferred source system using GraphQL, REST API, be what it may. Now, for you to make your website editable on the universal editor, the DOM first has to be instrumented with some microdata. We will go into more detail on this during the following demo, but to give a quick overview, this microdata is what maps the content sources. This lets the editor know what exactly needs to be edited. Most importantly, it lets the editor know where the content needs to reside and what is the type of the data. Once the app has been appropriately instrumented, it's good to go and you can now open the app inside of the Universal Editor. The editor now inspects the app, finds all of the elements that have been instrumented, it recognizes these as editable sections, and creates overlays. Now, the author can simply click on these overlays, and based on the microdata that you have provided, the editor opens the appropriate editable action, say text edit, media edit, and so on. Next, the author can make the changes that they desire, and on save, the editor kicks off the next set of operations, which is to persist the data on the source system. So what happens is the editor sends a request to our editor's persistent service. This persistent service in turn identifies what is the source system that the editor or that the data was stored on, adapts it into something that that system can understand, and forwards it on. Say, for example, your data is stored on an AEM instance, it changes the data into something AEM can understand. And once AEM receives this request, it performs the operation that was asked of it. Now, all subsequent fetch requests from your website will get the latest data that your author has created. So, in a nutshell, this is a high level view of what is happening from the initial rendering of your content to authoring inside of the editor, updating content, persisting it, and then re rendering inside of the website again. Next, we have a demo where you'll see all of these flow in action. So, I will hand it over to you now, Arthur. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sharnya. That was a brilliant presentation. So what we prepared for you here is a sample app, which, as you can see, renders in a beautiful way. But in order to make it editable inside of the Universal Editor, we need to do a few steps. So please let me show you. First of all, we require from you to include one small library inside of your app. This library will basically help us to perform communication between the Universal Editor and the app itself, so that the app might request something from the editor and the editor might request something from the app. Besides of including this library, what you also have to do is to instrument the page, as Sharanya mentioned. So we are expecting you to set some meta data inside of the header, where we are basically specifying that there is AEM connection and that we are going to consume the AEM plugin in the persistence layer, and that we are going to use this specific host to persist the changes. And now if I will select one of the elements on the page, I know this one is already instrumented. So as you can see, there is necessary item ID provided on the element and, for example, item type, because we have several types that editor is handling, and based on the given type, we are using a dedicated tool to edit this content, as I will show in the next phase. So if I open the same page inside of the Universal Editor, let me quickly show you how it looks. On the left-hand side, we have some tools. At the top, we have the location bar, which you already know very well from the browser, but you can provide the address of the app that you intend to edit here. So it's nicely represented in the browsers tab, and then you can share this link to someone else, for example. So the moment I will change the selection to from preview to selection, as you can see, when I hover on the elements, they are receiving some attention from the browser. And this means that Universal Editor was able to recognize that this specific element can be edited inside of the Universal Editor. So for example, if I will select the media tool and select one of the images on the right-hand side, we have some details of this specific image, like what's the resolution, what's the path, what's the alt text. Then let's say I would like to change some text on the page. After changing the tool to text, I can either do that by clicking one of the actions or by simply pressing the keyboard shortcut T in this case. When I press it here, I'm able to in context edit. And as Shania said, editing in context is very important. Sorry for my typos. So the moment I press enter, there is a request performed to the persistence layer. And then when I will go back to the page as it renders and I will reload it, it's expected that it will be hydrated from the latest content. And what's also important to mention here, as you can see, I edited a page and we right away see the feedback on main URL. This is only a shortcut for this specific presentation so that the actions are taking much faster. But in real world, what will happen, basically, you will edit the page in the same way as I did, but the changes will be visible only on the stage. And let's say the moment you will feel that the content is ready to be promoted from stage to prod, there is a publish action which will allow to push the content from stage to prod. All right. What's also great that besides of editing a simple text on the page, what we can also do is edit a more complex structure and also use a RTE to be more fine with that. So as you can see, I selected the fragment, and on the right-hand side, we have some first options to change the text, change adjustment or insert new content. We also have a statistics on this specific text, but let's say I would like to underline this specific fragment. I can do it. And again, this is immediately persisted. What's also nice is that, let's say you have multiple content fragments and it's hard to find which one you want to edit, but on this specific page, you know, for example, that you want to edit the body serve camp. So what you can do is by changing select mode to selection, you can select this specific content fragment. And as you can see, a contextual tool appeared, which allows me to open this specific content fragment in the content fragment editor. So when I do it in a new tab, I'm receiving this specific content fragment, and I can perform more actions here directly. All right, that would be it. I would like to also make some recap on what was just presented. So first, in order to make your app editable, you want to include one library which allows the communication between editor and the app. Then you're asked to declare the end systems that you want to use. And by the way, you can declare more than one if that's your wish, and provide the necessary instrumentation. And the instrumentation is presented here to focus on exactly what have to be done. So we have this meta tag that defines AEM con, and this AEM con is then referred inside of the DOM, and inside, besides of the paths that we know that we want to edit, we are mentioning the properties that are going to be edited, and we are defining what's the item type of this specific element. So in this case is text, and we also have an image. So to edit an image, we will use the media tool. For editing the text and rich text, we are going to use the text component. And again, when the app is loaded in the editor, it looks like this. And what's next? So you saw the editor, universal editor in a current shape, but we have a lot of things work in progress. So for example, we are introducing advanced asset rail. which will allow you to do more than simply change from one image to another, but maybe some simple actions like rotating the image or cropping or resizing. We are, of course, providing the ability to reorder components inside the edited app. And besides of this, there is also going to be advanced properties rail, which will allow to edit complex structures like what's possible currently in the content fragment editor. You will be also able to do that directly in the universal editor. And besides of this, of course, you will be able to add new components to the page. With this, we are sharing with you a few links so that you can get even more familiar with the universal editor. You can have a look at the overview. You can also see how headless content can be used with content fragments, as well as we are sharing the link to the sample app so that you can exactly see how the course library was included in the sources and how the necessary instrumentation was provided. And in case you would like to directly edit the app in Universal Editor, there is also a deployed sample app. So basically you go to the Universal Editor using this fourth link, and you can directly play with Universal Editor there. And with this, we reached the questions and answers section. So we are very happy to provide answers to your questions, but in case you would like to have some follow-up discussions or learn even more, we strongly encourage you to go to Experience Link. So please scan the QR code or follow the provided link, and let's get more communication there. Thank you.
Hi there, we do have one question so far coming in. Can custom components be implemented? Or how can they be implemented?
So yeah, it is completely up to the users as already requested, already mentioned. So you can create your components as and how you require. There is absolutely no restrictions anymore. It's only that the content that you have within your components will be instrumented to be editable inside of the editor. So we don't really look into how the rendering is being done or anything else, but we are solely concerned about how the content is being handled and how the update needs to be done for that.
Exactly. I would like to add that Sharanya mentioned that earlier during the presentation, but from Universal Editor point of view, it doesn't matter whether app is rendered on the client side or on the server side or which framework you are using. What's only necessary is that it's properly instrumented.
Great, thank you. Another question coming in is, do we support AEM 6.5 on AMS or on-prem?
At the moment, no. Right now, the support is for AEM on cloud, but that is on the roadmap to be supported.
Thank you. And here's another one. Can you talk about external content sources like Excel, Word, etc.?
Yeah, maybe I can tackle this topic. So currently we have, when speaking about persisting changes, we have to think that we have a persistence layer, and it's extensible system. So basically, there are plugins which are taking care of persisting data to different sources. Currently, we have AEM plugin implemented, but in our experimentation before, we had some proof of concepts of editing a Google spreadsheet, for example, or in case there was a static page hosted on GitHub, which on each commit was triggering deployment, we were also able to directly provide changes in the GitHub. So Universal Editor was performing a commit, which was triggering deployment, and the changes were also visible directly on a deployed static site. So in general, yes, it can be possible. It requires implementation of another plugin for the persistence layer.
Thank you. Another question for you. What's the feature of Page Editor and SPA Editor?
Would it be possible to elaborate, please?
Let's see. That's the question. So I'll read the whole thing. What's the feature of Page Editor and SPA Editor? Is Universal Editor seen as a feature? Sorry, that's as clear as I can get on that one.
So the Universal Editor is going to be a completely new editor. It's completely different from the Page Editor and the SPA Editor in its approach, the architecture, in what are the use cases that it is meant to tackle, and so on. A Universal Editor is more about content and making everything flexible, being framework agnostic, whereas the Page and SPA Editor is a bit more tied to AEM itself. But it comes with its own capabilities like template editing and so on. So it's a bit like comparing apples and oranges. It's both very valuable in its own right, but it's again completely different um, uh, services, I would say. So yeah, the Universal Editor, however, is something that is still in development, and it doesn't have as many advanced capabilities as the other two editors that was mentioned. But yeah, I think it's we have a feedback survey in the next before we finish off the session. So it would be great to hear from all of you, like what are the features that you would be interested in? What do you think that is already available that is valuable for you? And as Arthur already mentioned during what's next, those are the things that we are currently focusing on, that we think are the maybe the most foundational things that all customers out there would really like to have to start with.
Thank you. More questions coming in for you guys. Are more than 2 environments supported?
Yes, so basically, as I mentioned in the header, user can specify more than one entry for the backend system. So if there will be, if components on the app are hydrated from different instances or third-party systems that have this implementation done, and they are supported by our persistence layer, there can be multiple endpoints defined in the meta tag. And a Universal Editor will exactly know that this specific element have to be persisted on one instance, and the other element have to be persisted somewhere else.
Thank you. Here's another one. Does the publish button replicate content to an AEM publish instance?
Right now, yes. So suppose, as Arthur said, if the original approach would be theoretically that all of the content that you're editing is on an author instance. So when you click the publish, the editor kind of gathers up all of the content on your on the page that points to an AEM instance and does the publish as it would if you are doing a publish from your AEM page editor author. So it's basically doing the same thing. But I think we are working on making it a bit more streamlined in the future. But for now, that is indeed what it does.
Great, thank you. Will the editor load content fragments that are being rendered on the front end through GraphicQL calls?
Yeah, sure. As Shania mentioned during architecture description, basically, if the app is consuming, is hydrating components, it can use any data delivery APIs that that it wants. So if there is a GraphQL, can use GraphQL. So the answer is yes.
Great, thank you. Does the editor respect cookies? Is the editor experience the same as the web experience?
So actually, I don't understand the question completely, because from editor perspective, we are actually not using cookies to store some data that we might reuse. So, but in general, yeah,
Okay.
I don't know exactly which cookies user had in mind.
Not a problem. I think you did a great job answering that. How do you how do we enforce permissions for editing?
Okay, so right now, the main thing that we're focusing on is content that is coming from AEM. So that is already kind of tackled, because for accessing the editor, you have to log in with your Adobe ID. So we use the same authentication to write any changes that you have back to your AEM instance. So that is how we are tackling authentication for content that is coming from AEM and to write back to AEM. And as Arthur mentioned, we are doing some internal POCs and experimentations on Google Spreadsheets and GitHub. But yeah, once that is a bit more researched and finalized, we will probably document how to do the authentication for those as well in a meaningful manner.
I think this is a part 2 to the same question. How do you make sure unauthorized authors won't have access to edit irrelevant pages?
Yeah, so it kind of, as you said, follows from the previous one. So again, it gets the authentication token and so on from your Adobe login. So this is completely regarding how it works as long as your content is on AEM. So when you write back to the AEM instance, it uses this particular token. So whatever privileges that your user has and what operations you can do is the same thing that you will be able to do on the editor. So while the author might still see the overlays and might still be able to edit, the persistence itself will not be successful. So it doesn't really matter, because whatever changes they make will not be reflected back on the source system and thus not on the end page.
Thank you so much. It looks like that might be all the questions that have come in for right now. So thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
we do have a final slide as mentioned with the survey. So it would be great if all of you took the time just to let us know what you felt about this, let us know some of your insights and feedback. And it would be great for us to know what you think. And we also have a session on understanding GraphQL API performance options and query optimizations coming up next in the headless track. So just make sure to check that out as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.